Hello and welcome to the Doc Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Mike DeLuke, and it's my mission to help you lead a happier, healthier, and more prosperous life, both personally and professionally. Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Doc Podcast. We've got another awesome show for you today, and I am really excited to have this conversation with today's guest, Dr. Trevor Nichols. I'm sure many of you know Trevor, but just to tell you a bit more about him, he's an Arizona native who attended Arizona State University for his undergrad, where he completed his degree in exercise science and wellness and graduated as ASU's valedictorian. He then attended Arizona School for Dentistry and Oral Health, where he earned his dental, orthodontic, and master's degrees. After graduation, Trevor joined Dr. Stuart Frost in private practice in Mesa, Arizona, where he worked until October 2023. And to announce some exciting news, he is preparing to open a new office in Gilbert, Arizona in the next few months. Trevor's also been actively involved in education and speaking since 2018 and has lectured around the world on both fixed orthodontics and clear aligners. Outside of orthodontics, Trevor has an amazing family with his wife of 15 years, Alyssa, and his 4 boys, 12, 9, and 7. He's also very passionate about his faith as well as his health and fitness, and we're going to talk more about that during today's show. And with that, I would like to welcome Dr. Trevor Nichols to the show. Welcome, Trevor.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate the awesome intro. That was like super polished, and I have to be honest to say that when you were talking about the new practice, I'm like so excited about it. I got goosebumps. Like, it makes me emotional. I'm so stoked about it. And I know you've been there, done that. And I know a lot of the audience is either considering or is in the middle of opening a new practice. And it's like having a baby, it's such an exciting life and lots of possibilities to make your dreams come true.
Yeah. So it's in the works, right? So where is it at this point?
It's in the works. So I right now we're about a month from opening. That's the process. I'm just subleasing space here from a dental training center actually, while I'm completing my build out kind of down the street here, and just super excited. We're going to start slow, so we'll be open just about 2.5 days a week. I work another side gig and hopefully grow from there to do my own thing by myself, hopefully within a couple of years.
That's so awesome. And yes, having done it myself 20 years ago, it does not seem like that. You can feel those jitters and butterflies I can literally feel walking into the building that I was going to practice in for the first time. Much like you, I got my start just subletting from another practitioner, a guy named Dr. Jim Chauvin, who I always tell I'll be greatly indebted to because he let me just sublet his space in the town that I wanted to practice in. He was older in his career and was just awesome. And it's like, yeah, it's my satellite and kind of be here the days I'm not. So that let me get my start without having to lay out a bunch financially and try to figure this whole thing out because I'd never worked for anybody. I moonlighted in my family's general dental practice during my residency, but I had never worked in an orthodontic practice and I had no experience in running a business. So I can still remember that feeling very well and recruiting team members. And then when we built out my larger office space and bought that building, it's fun. It's nerve-wracking. It's exciting. And it is. And your analogy to it being like a child, it doesn't change. And as it grows, it's like one of your kids growing. It literally is very similar.
I love that. I do feel like the subletting, as you mentioned, is such a cool way to get started because, like you mentioned, the financial reasons, and plus we don't have the experience necessarily of starting something. So from going 0 to 100 is really hard. Slowly ramp up and then get into your own thing full time, I think is just a great option if you can find it.
Yeah, it's funny because I have a lot through the coaching side of things I do. And even before that, just because I've taught residents my whole career, they always will be asking, should I start my own or should I hang a shingle? Should I go work for someone first? And really it's different for everybody. It is a personal decision, but there are certain things that I think are kind of tried and true across the board that people just have to figure out if it's for them. And really, some people can go out and just do it. But like you said, I found it was much easier. There wasn't pressure on me to have to the same level of pressure to have to pay that huge loan and building loan and practice loan. I mean, I was able to keep my expenses really low, really conservative, and able to focus on my patient care and my systems And then as my patient care ramped up and I started having revenue coming in, I could then start to expand into those other areas and not have to leverage as much debt. And the debt I did leverage, I knew I was going to be able to handle. And that's a big, big, big difference than, like you said, just going all out day one, taking out this huge loan. Not that you can't do it, but is that really the best thing?
Sure. And most of us coming out of school, we have enough debt as it is. So not that it's a bad thing always. It's a necessary evil, I think, for most of us. But certainly if we can mitigate the amount, it's a great thing.
Yeah,
so
agreed. And that definitely plays in as well. So tell me a little bit about, just before we kind of dive into the ortho side of things, your family life. You obviously, we share a lot in common, as we started talking a little bit leading into this and getting to know one another, hopping on a call a little bit ago. And it's funny because one of the residents where I teach at NSU, Mitch, he said, I gave a lecture and he's like, you remind me of Dr. Nichols. And I had seen you and heard of you. And he's like, you should reach out to him for the podcast. And he's like, you guys are very similar and really into fitness and really passionate about what you do and lecturing. And so I want to thank Mitch Hong out there for giving us and he had shadowed you, I believe, right? And he spoke so highly of you and your and how you practice. I mean, it was,
he shadowed me, and I treated him as well.
Okay. Yeah, no, great guy. And
residents, because it's just a great opportunity to help them. They go through the process and they learn it as a patient and an orthodontist, and it's just a unique experience. So
yeah, well, he had nothing but wonderful things to say and what he learned observing you. But I'd love to hear more about just kind of your life outside of work, your family. I know fitness is very important to you, and your faith. Just kind of give a little background of who you are as a person, the part that other people may not be aware of.
Yeah, I mean, my 4 things in life are really family, fitness, teeth, and faith. Those are like my things.
Yep.
My family life is super busy. I know, as you mentioned, you're kind of in that boat as well. And my twins are really into sports. They're into competitive basketball. So we're always at games for them. And all my kids actually play basketball. And that in school takes over a lot of our life. And I think a lot of us got into this profession because we feel like we could provide really well for our families, doing something that we love, that can make a difference in people's lives. And at the same time, have balance. I put quotes on balance because I think does that ever really exist, is something we could talk about, but it ebbs and flows. But my family is always the most important thing, it comes before really anything else in my life. And sometimes, we have to sacrifice certain things for our family, and sometimes even time with family has to be sacrificed. I kind of think of it as like we're spinning these plates, and those are the plates that I'm spinning. It's the family, it's the faith, it's the fitness, and it's the teeth. And sometimes as one of those plates, as you're spinning, starts to slow, you have to focus on spinning that plate before you get to the next one. So that's kind of the balance. Is, does it ever really exist? You have to put more attention in certain areas that are maybe slowing down to build your whole life and what we consider like fulfillment in our life. So family life is super busy, but it's crazy. I know you know this too, with just how quick the time goes by. It's a kid.
As my senior's about to graduate in a couple of weeks and head off to UF. I'm like, what is going on?
When they're real little, it's hard, It's hard, I feel like, but as they get older and get more freedom and flexibility, it just goes too fast. And I just cherish my relationship with my kids, and my wife has always been my rock. She supported me so much through this whole journey. And,
mine as well. Yeah, very similar there as well. Yeah.
For us to have significant others, partners, spouses, whatever it is, we don't go through this alone.
Right.
And they sacrifice as much as we do, especially if you have kids. And I tell people now, I'm like, I feel like I owe back taxes because my wife sacrificed so much too, that now I want her to enjoy and reap the benefits of the sacrifices that she made for our family at the same time. So I just honor that. I mean, we have a really spectacular marriage where I think we just really work to put each other first.
Yep.
And that really works well for us. There's no scorekeeping of who did this or that. I always am doing what I can to make her life better. And she does the same for me. And I think that it just makes our life beautiful. We care so deeply about each other. So that's kind of the family part, which I love. That's number one. And
one thing on the family part, if I can interrupt for a second, is I love how you put it in the four plates, not one plate higher than the other, but they're all at the same level and just spinning at different speeds. And I've never heard it explained like that. And I know a challenge for a lot of people is they feel like they have to rank the plates like 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And whatever their plates are. Everyone, maybe their plates might be a little different, but they feel like they have to rate them. And at one point, they got to kind of shuffle that order, or they always try to keep the same order. And I think it actually is a really neat way to think and say, no. These are level plates, right? They're all at the same level. They're just spinning differently. And sometimes some get going really, really fast, and you have to make sure it doesn't get faster than you can hold it without it tipping. And some, like you said, they slow down, and just adjusting that. And I will echo the sentiments of having a wife that is extremely supportive and there for me through those times, because it's hard. And my wife actually got involved in the practice more than we ever wanted her to, but just the need arose as the practice grew, and we needed help on that side, and was a practice admin, and got to see, the good, bad, and the ugly of what we do day in and day out, and the challenges we face as, the business owner side. The clinical side is the part that's front facing and fun and kind of becomes the easy part, really the fun and easy, exciting part. That background can be pretty tough, and the team management and all that. And it thankfully, it grew our relationship as we went through that process, but it's not easy. And there's a lot of challenges there. So again, I think having that significant other in your life that can help you navigate and balance you out a little bit. I tend to run pretty hot. I tend to, much like I'm sure yourself, you're intense, type A.
Yeah.
What's that?
She simmers you a little bit.
Exactly. Okay, take a breath. So having that balance, I think, is so important. And the other thing is your kids are just getting to that age where, you travel basketball now, it really ramps up, and it goes so quickly, to the point that earlier this week, my two girls, both, one's a freshman, one's a senior, they had their last varsity lacrosse game, and they were played on the same team together, and that's it. They're done. It was regional semifinals. We lost. And so before you know it, all those traveling leagues and games and practices, and now it's like one is off and heading to college. So it does go quickly. So again, there are those plates, right? One where you're trying to balance that.
I sympathize with you for that. I'm scared for that already. But I love what you said about the relationship part and her kind of balancing you out. And whether it's a marriage or a friendship, I think in life, and one thing that's really brought me a lot of peace, I would say, is just having those people in your life that can be your cheerleader. Because we are really hard on ourselves. And I think all of us as orthodontists, a lot of us are type A, and we're perfectionists, and we look at our faults all day long, whether it be with what we're doing clinically, or it's never enough, right? Yep. And those four plates that we're spinning, although we're doing our best to spin them, we're never going to be perfect at it all.
Right.
But we're going to expect ourselves to be the perfect dad, the perfect orthodontist, the perfect, let's say, like, disciple of God or Christ, right? And the perfect, perfect physique and fitness. Like, I expect that I'm perfect at all those things, and we're simply not. And one of the things I learned in residency is I did some moonlighting, as well as that. One of my mentors said, "Hey, they call it our practice for a reason. It's not our perfect." And that changed my whole perspective. And I'm like, I don't have to be perfect, but the more that I practice, the better that I will get. But I'm going to be perfect, and it's okay to not be perfect.
Yep.
Having those people in our lives that can strengthen us when we're down on ourselves, and let us know that what we're doing is going in the right direction, and also check us when we're not doing I think most of us, though, have the opposite problem. We're doing all that we can and probably too much.
Yep.
We need someone to say, "Hey, like, what you're doing is enough."
Right.
And having those people in your life, it's just made a really big difference for me. And again, my wife is one of those people, but it doesn't have to be a spouse. It could be a friend. It could be a family member. But I think just having tight relationships like that, life is about relationships.
Yep.
And really good quality relationships. If you have those, they can bless your life, and they can help keep those plates spinning when you can't spin them anymore. They can pick up the slack for you a lot of time.
That's so true, right? I mean, that's what you need to rely on, because when one plate is spinning differently, I know it was a huge help for me with the practice, right? When it started spinning too fast, I needed her to come in and pick up more time and make sacrifices in her own life to be able to help that, me balance that plate, so to speak. So that is so true. And I think the relationships, I think that's gotten harder for a lot of reasons, just social media and just the way things are today. I think that those deep core relationships, and studies bear this out, that it's harder for people to develop they have more social connections, but they don't necessarily have more deep relationships. And I don't know how that's another one of the many challenges for younger docs to navigate so many things. And I almost feel like another conversation we could have is, how do you pick the plates? There's a lot of plates spinning, and there's so many things there that people get focused on. And then, like you said, if they don't have certain deep relationships, it can be hard. So, I mean, what is your advice to younger docs? How many years have you been out now?
I've been out, let's see, 7 years.
7. Okay. And so 7 years out. So you're pretty far removed, but still pretty close within that 10-year window.
I feel fresh still, for sure.
Yeah. You're definitely in that window. Myself being going on 20 here, I can feel the generational difference.
Sure.
I can feel just the fact that I did this and learned how to do this at a different time, just from not even the orthodontics, maybe as much as just I guess when I learned how to do it, we didn't have Invisalign. So I guess I am dating myself a little bit there. But so what do you say to young docs? Because I'm sure you get asked all the time. You're a leader in this profession. And by the way, it's amazing that you have emerged as somebody who is as prominent, as much of a leader in this profession in such a short period of time. And I'm not just saying that. To have the clinical skills you have, and we'll get more into that in a little bit, is really well beyond your years with that. So people look to you. They see your ability. They see your success. And obviously, they want to try to emulate that. How do you advise these younger docs coming out to navigate these waters?
It is hard. And, I think that success can be defined in so many different ways, and it's so individual. And to some people, they want to reach a certain level, let's say clinically, or they want to reach a certain level in a business, like financially, or they want to impact people a certain way. So for me, what I kind of tell them is, number one, try and put yourself in a position in which you can learn what type of orthodontist you want to be the fastest. What I mean by that is all the things, right? So I mean, clinically, kind of what type of systems that you like, how you feel like your personality matches with certain types of patients. What does it for you? What brings you the fulfillment from orthodontics, and figure that out kind of as soon as you can. And once you have that figured out, go all in on that, whatever it may be. And I have friends that are so into the clinical that that's what brings them joy. And I'm more of that side. It's like, I just love the clinical. But I have other friends who don't love the clinical. They actually don't like that much at all, but they love the relationships. And it's not that they don't do great ortho. They do it for the relationships. And that's what brings them the fulfillment and the joy. And I think because of that, we need to find what we define as success for ourselves. And it's easy to look at other orthodontists, you're like yourself, and think, okay, well, Dr. Mike has done all these great things, and in order for me to be successful, I need to do those same things. And I think, as we do that, we fool ourselves a little bit. And I can say this as a good example is like, I started working with Dr. Frost right after residency, and I looked at him and all the amazing things that he had done in his career. And I thought, well, if I want to be successful in my career, I have to follow down those steps. If I want to be fulfilled in my career and be quote unquote successful. And what I found is the more that I tried to be like him, and do the exact things that he did, it wasn't being true to myself and what I felt like I needed and I wanted for my career. And the more that I tried to focus on myself and bettering who I was and finding out what the fulfillment was for me, the more joy that I got out of orthodontics and the less stress that I had. And it helped me kind of hone in on, why do I love doing what I do? And so I think about that often. Anytime I make a decision, like regarding the new practice, or even like my life in general, I always come back to like, what is my why? What is my reason for doing what I do? And it all comes back to that. If I'm true to my why and I'm authentic to that, then I feel like the steps that I'm going to take are going to lead me down a path of personal success. And again, that may not be something that people ever see. And we know with social media and all the things, like, it's not, a lot of that is fake. I mean, we know there's a personification of it all, and it may, some of it may be true, some of it may be not true, and we do the best we can, and part of that is for business purposes. But I think for them, it's putting themselves in a situation which they can learn what they feel like success is for them and what's going to bring them the most fulfillment out of their career, and try and find that out as soon as they can, and then go down that path. And if it's like you, where they want to go out and start a practice right away and they have the strength to do that and they feel like they're capable, then awesome. I mean, I just didn't have that confidence coming out of school. I didn't. And even now it's a scary thing for me. And some people need more time, and some people never want to own, and that's okay. They want to just make a good living and focus on their patients and not do the business part. But finding out what brings them fulfillment as soon as possible, I think will bring them that fulfillment in an authentic way that will lead them to loving their life as soon as they can.
I completely agree. I so much so, and I had Courtney Levine on last week, and we were talking about a lot of these things, and she opened up a great amount, which I greatly appreciated, about the challenges as a mom, and a business owner and a practitioner and a lecturer, and kind of all the things that we've done. But then you add motherhood on top, which I said to her, I think makes it even harder.
No doubt. I mean, I can't imagine trying to be the mom and the orthodontist. I mean, as dads, we get a little bit more freedom, I would say there.
That's what I said to her. Exactly. Yep.
Different balance there. That is a totally different struggle that I admire and I just honor so much.
That's what I told her. I mean, she's doing the interview with me and she's 38 weeks pregnant. And I'm like, I mean, I can't imagine, and has seeing patients still, is trying to get through next week. So, she was opening up about those challenges. And then we don't have the challenges where we have to manage that side. But then the flip side is that freedom we have, I think, almost puts more pressure on us, and sort of that traditional society where it's like the man should be the one producing. We almost feel we really feel that burden as well, and sometimes take that too seriously on the male side of things. And it creates this kind of interesting challenge where we have to try to navigate those waters the best we can. But what you said that I think is really important, it's a common theme with what Courtney said. And I say that one of the lectures I give the residents, always one of the first lectures, is vision and goals. And I do that because I say to them, you have to start to figure out what you want your life to look like. Your practice life, your personal life, all of it. And I find that we kind of become these hamsters on a wheel in what we do, right? We're type A, we're driven, we're pushing to the top level at every level we are. I mean, you were valedictorian at ASU, you've achieved at every level. And we get into ortho, and we're dental school, we do well there, we get into ortho and keep going. And then we get to the end of our schooling, and it's sort of this moment of, now what? Right? I mean, there's this moment where you're just kind of like, okay, now what do I do from here? Because not a lot of us have ever thought about or had anybody encourage us to do exactly what you just said. And exactly what Courtney said she's now doing in late 30s, had started doing late 30s to early 40s. And that is vision plan for your life and figure out what you want your life to look like. And everything from personally down to what you said. What type of practice do you want? And not just, do I want 7 chairs or 5 chairs or 20 chairs or partners or associates? What type of patient do I want to focus on? What type of team do I want? And how long do I want to do this? And in what capacity do I want to do this? And I feel like we never get taught that. I never did. And in talking to residents and other docs, whether it's through this platform or others, just at a meeting, chatting with people, I don't feel like anyone really got that. And it's interesting, the common themes that all of us, many of us who are a little more senior in this, are now realizing, like, wait, you've got to define that. You've got to define. No one's going to define it for you. You have to define that. So how do you recommend people do that? Because I give them some exercises, and I'm like, it's bore everyone with it now. I did actually kind of one of my earlier podcasts. I did a vision and goals little podcast. I can put a link to that in the show, but just kind of explaining a little more on how I do it. But how does it work? How do you find that it works for you to do that?
Yeah. And first, just to piggyback, it's like, no one's going to do it for you. And I think a lot of us, we live for the next thing, right? It's like, oh, I just need to get into dental school, and I just need ortho, and I just need to get a job. And we live that life of like we're going to be happy the next thing that we do. And and we live for other people in a lot of ways. And I've done that for so long. And so now, as you mentioned, I'm coming to the point now where it's like, what makes me happy? Mm-hmm. And it's not wrong to think about your own happiness. Mm-hmm. It's really important to say is like, it's not selfish
Yeah.
to think about what's going to make you happy, because it starts with you. If you
Yes,
can't
it starts with you. Yeah.
you can't be happy, how can you spread happiness and joy in an authentic and true way to yourself? And when I was doing it for other people, it wasn't as authentic as it should be. And so my advice there, because I'm going through that, as you mentioned, is like, I'm trying to find now what it is that really brings me joy. And I think a lot of us, we know deep down what it is that we want. I really do think that it's taking the time to really identify what those things are.
Yeah.
And try and put the fear aside. And that's a hard thing sometimes, because it's always, oh, well, what if? Put the fear aside. Say you had all the money in the world, all the possibilities, all the capabilities. What would your dream life look like? And
I love that.
Big. It's okay to think big, but I think a lot of us, we deep down know what our core values are. We know what is important to us.
Yeah.
And so identifying what those are and how they relate to us as business people or as clinicians or family members, whatever that is, and defining, like I define those 4 things, or what is important to me in my life. Well, what does that mean though? What does that mean as far as faith goes, and family and business and all that? And it isn't measured by how large our practice is, or how large our social media following is, or how much lecturing that we do. It's so individually defined. And I think a lot of us, especially younger, I felt this way too. It's like, in order for me, again, to be happy or successful, I need to check those boxes. And the more that I've gone down the path of doing lots of those things, the more I'm like, I don't need some of those things for me to be happy. And some of them take away from my happiness.
Especially if you're not happy.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, the more that you feel fulfilled, the more you can give to others. And I feel part of the way that we can maintain that is just identifying what it is that we really feel to our core. We have to be authentic to ourselves. And a lot of times we know what that is, and we talk ourselves out of it. But again, if you go back to your why and you make your decisions around your why, then I think things will follow.
What are some of your whys? How did you come, I guess say this way, what are some of your whys, and how has that changed as you've kind of been redefining things? Hey everybody, be sure to check out the Doc website, where you can get access to tons of great information, including free educational content, access to private one-on-one coaching with me, ADA CERP recognized CE courses, and amazing patient testimonials. Just go to theorthocoach.com. That's theorthocoach.com. And now back to today's episode.
I love that. And things have changed actually a lot in fatherhood. And the way that I've kind of defined some of my core values are, what are the things that I want my kids or my sons to learn? And what do I want? How do I want to impact them? And I relate that to like my patients or my team at the same way. It's like, we're a family. What are some things I want people to maybe remember me by? What are some things I want to instill in my children? And the first is gratitude. Just having gratitude every single day for what we've been given, the opportunities that we have. The more we focus on gratitude, things are always better. There's always a bright side. So gratitude for sure. Hard work is the second. I mean, I really want my kids to learn what hard work means. I was talking with one of my sons the other day, and going through things opening, they see what we're going through with this. And I think it's a beautiful thing to involve our kids in what we're doing and family members. And he had said to me, Dad, I'm proud of you for going after your dreams. And I was,
that's awesome.
My gosh, like that meant so much to me. And I said, hey, your dreams are worth fighting for, but they're never free.
Yeah.
They're never free
and never easy.
And I think some orthodontists fall into the trap a little bit. It's like, once I graduate, I've made it.
Yes. I so agree with that. And I almost feel like it's because we always have to have humans. We need to have an endpoint of something we're working towards, right? Where there's got to be something. And it's kind of interesting because it's like the flip side of what we're talking about, setting that endpoint. But I think they go hand in hand. And that is, we almost do have an endpoint, but it's just getting to the point where we are done with school. And then all of a sudden it's now what? And no one ever taught us along that way that we needed to, that's not the endpoint. That's the start point of the next chapter.
Yeah. And the orthodontists I see that work really hard, they're the ones that figure those fulfillment values out the fastest.
Interesting.
They work really hard when they get into a practice environment, whether it's their own or an associateship. they really dig into the patients. They don't go back to the office and sit down. They go in the waiting room. They talk to patients. They go through that experience of identifying what type of patient they relate with.
Yep.
And clinically, they're not just walking away at the end of the day. They're reviewing their cases. They're taking the pictures. They're looking at what's working, what's not working, identifying mistakes and successes, that have worked.
Yep.
But it's work. And the more that we work, the more benefit we'll get there. So the first, again, is like gratitude. The second is hard work. I get a lot of fulfillment from hard work. I think we all do. Anything that's worth doing, requires hard work. The third thing for me is service. I really find that by serving, we get a lot of joy. And I feel like the more that we serve, the more joy that it brings. And so those are kind of my three big things that I've found that for me bring me lots of joy is gratitude, hard work, and service. And the more I focus on those three things, the more fulfillment that I get. But it requires work and it requires intention and being intentional about the things that I do that will follow those three things. And we all fall into the traps of them. But I think the way that I've learned to figure that out, again, is just taking the time to reflect upon what brings me happiness. And I didn't do that for a long time. And I wasn't in a place where I was really fulfilled because, again, I was doing it for other people and I wasn't being authentic to myself. And I hadn't really spent the time to think about what it is that I wanted from my career and for my family and all the balance of all those things. And now that I am spending the time doing that, it's a whole nother level of excitement, I think, for what is coming and what is to come. And I'm so much more optimistic, whereas before I was more pessimistic.
Interesting. Did you realize you were pessimistic at the time, or is it just looking back?
I did. I did. I realized that something wasn't right, that I wasn't, and I knew it was with me. I knew it wasn't in the practice or the environment that I was in. I knew that it was in my heart and that I needed to do some searching to find out what was going to bring me joy. And instead of doing it again for other people, that as I looked to what was authentic to me, it just brought out new creativity too. And we all think that, everything's been done, but the more we're authentic to ourselves, you get this creativity and inspiration. I really feel like we're here on this earth to create. Yeah. I really believe that. And we have to allow the creative juices to flow. But if it's not coming from us and it's coming from other people, it doesn't work right. It doesn't work the same.
No, it doesn't. And there's almost like a lack of sincerity, and we know it. Even if we don't know it consciously, we just know it. And I know that because I was in the exact same position. And you and I had never spoken about this directly, but when I made the decision to step away from my practice, and people were like, what are you, how, people like me are like, Dr. Mike, how, you're so young. And, I was almost 20 years into practice and I'd built it from scratch and I left it all in the field. And I was at the point where I had a vision of going out as I kind of redefined my vision in life. And actually for me, COVID kind of became the first time I stopped and breathed a little bit and slept a little bit and said, something's not right. Like you said, I knew it, but I didn't know it. Now, my wife, family members, they kind of could see it, but better than I could. But I was still in the middle. Again, we type A blinders, fight, go. I can handle this. I can do whatever. And then I had a minute where I couldn't do anything. And I thought a lot about it. And I took a lot of time to kind of do some soul searching and really look at what I wanted the next half of my professional life to look like. And I realized it wasn't that. It wasn't being a solo practitioner in the situation I was. And I've said different times on the show, and I won't go into it all now, but I tried to bring associates in and it didn't work. I didn't find the right fit and wasn't looking like there were any great prospects there. And the pace my practice was going at was getting more. When I had Chris Benson value my practice, he's like, you're doing the work of 2.5 to 3 orthodontists in here. Like, how are you sustaining this? And I'm like, it's not easy. And so I kind of went fast and furious, as is my personality. But it wasn't I'm so passionate about my patients and the results I got. And I love what I did clinically, but something was missing because my deeper calling I really felt was to go out and teach. And I always taught. I was on faculty at multiple hospitals and cleft craniofacial team. I was the orthodontist on, and I loved that. Something in me and little messages I was getting from people saying, Mike, you need to go out and teach more. And I would just say, I don't have time. People on the cleft craniofacial team, the surgeons, Mike, you've got to go teach this. I don't have time. Well, ironically, in May 13th, that night, the AAPMD, I'm giving a webinar on cleft craniofacial treatment and some unique ways to do it with braces and wires and not expanders. the same exact thing they were telling me 5-6 years ago I needed to find the time to do, I didn't have the time to do, that now I'm able to do that. And it goes exactly to what you're saying. When I redefined my vision and was willing to take those chances, take some risk, it's not comfortable. It wasn't easy walking away from a practice that I had built from nothing. But at the same time, I never wavered. I never doubted it. And I knew to be the best me I could be as a husband, as a father, as a person, as an orthodontist. And now I'm engaged in teaching much more than I ever was before. Before I'd go in, once a month or twice a month and try to, it was almost like it was just an afterthought that I was trying just to fit in because I liked it, but I couldn't devote to it, much like you said, in some of the things that you have to balance. But now I can really immerse myself in it. And this is creating the best me. And I honestly don't know what happened to me. And again, credit to my wife, especially, who was like, what's the point? If you keep going at this pace, she saw it in me before I did. What is going to happen? Like, it wasn't about the money at that point. Thankfully, I was able to walk away from practice financially. I'd done great and made a lot of good financial decisions. And so it wasn't that. It was just, you get on that wheel and you just keep going and achieving. And deep down, something's not right. Deep down, something's missing, but you don't know what it is. And it's pretty much, you figured you're just too busy to figure it out, and I'll just keep going. So again, that little break with COVID where I couldn't keep going and I had a few weeks to soul search a little bit and get a little rest and just kind of talk through things and with others, it helped me gain some perspective. And that's when I made the decision that later that year, I had the thought at that point, really didn't conclusively decide it until a little later that year, but got me thinking that direction. And then a few months later, I decided I was going to stop taking new cases and phase the practice down. I finished everyone up I started. We'll go into the kind of corporate thing a little bit in a minute, but I just decided for me, that wasn't it. I didn't want to be there for another period of years working. I got some great offers, but I turned them down. I don't have anything wrong with anybody going that route, but it just wasn't for me, and finished all my cases up. And we ended up moving to Florida, and girls love it here. So life is funny and kind of, as we said before, not to sound corny about it, but kind of God's plan. It's like, you don't know what's out there for you. You have to trust the process. But the key to all of that is you have to keep reevaluating and not just put your head in the sand and say, I'm going to work my way out of this. And I know that's my tendency, right? I'll just work harder. I'll work harder and make it and figure it out. Next thing you know, like, you're running out of hours in the day and now you're not the person you want to be to your family, to your friends. And so I give you you figured it out a lot earlier than I did. And I was having the same conversation. It's so funny because when I schedule these and have people on the show, I don't plan it in a certain sequence, but the way everyone schedules Courtney, actually, we even rescheduled. So to that point, we had to move ours around a little. So you fell in right after Courtney, and literally Courtney's episode was like the same exact sort of theme. So I'm so excited about that, because that means there's a lot of us out there who are having the same exact challenges that you, Courtney, myself have had and continue to have. And then that's this podcast format. People can kind of open up about this and say, like, hey, look, if these people who I see out there lecturing and doing all this, if they had these challenges, it's almost like the anti-social media, right? This is the real side. It's like, no, this is it. Look, we've all succeeded and none of us are crying like, oh my gosh, poor us. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of challenges out there, and talking about that openly so colleagues can hear, I think, is really, really important.
Yeah, there's certainly not enough of that. And I think just the vulnerability of open and saying, hey, we're all going through stuff. Life isn't perfect. And when someone asks you how you're doing, that's, again, those relationships and how we form those are just being open and honest and vulnerable with people. And it allows them to pour into us. And, being open to receiving is an important part of life. We talk about, the giving and the service, but part of that also is being open to receiving. And if we're not open to receiving, we're denying somebody else the opportunity to serve. But even then, it brings some humility. It brings some guidance that we may not see from outside of that. And as you mentioned, it's, God's plan works perfect. Life comes at you perfectly. And sometimes we have these roadblocks like COVID or, practice transitions or things like that we think could be a really bad thing for us. But again, we use those as opportunities to get us to doing something different. And a lot of times we get clues along the way. You were getting clues. I was getting clues. And we have to understand what those clues are, not just overworking, like you mentioned, working that out of us, but rather than working it out of us, working into us to what it is that we need to get from that. These little inklings that we're having, the little, those little secrets that we're getting to ourselves, mean and we need to dig into those to find where the root of those are coming from in order to bring them out and again make the changes and reevaluate what's going to make us the happiest and the best for ourselves and our families and our patients and all that.
Yeah, giving ourselves some grace. I don't think I gave myself enough grace. Still probably don't, but I think that's something we don't do.
And none of us do. And I think as orthodontists and these type A, we're the worst at it. We expect ourselves again to be perfect, and instead of being our best friends like we should be, we're our own worst critics, and we look at everyone else and we compare. And comparison really is the root of unhappiness.
Yep.
And it's really easy to fall into nowadays because we see everybody else's quote unquote perfect life.
Yeah.
And we think that we're doing something wrong.
Right. Something must be wrong with me because that's not me.
Yeah, I'm doing something wrong clinically, or my cases aren't as good as this person or that person. And it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter if we're going down to our why, which, could be defined as purpose.
Mm-hmm.
You defined it good as like purpose. This is your purpose, is teaching, is sharing.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to find what that purpose is to get fulfillment. And it's not the same. It's different for everybody. It has to be individual because you're individual.
Yeah. And it may change throughout life. And for me, it was a huge, I couldn't be the teacher I am if I didn't have 20 years of clinical experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And it should change, I would think, right?
Yeah.
The more that we get, it's going to lead us down a different path, but we have to follow our hearts to what's authentic to us to get us to that right path. If not, we're living inauthentically, and that isn't going to bring us happiness.
No. And I think almost that's the worst, right? I think when we're not being authentic because we know it. And I think we're so scared to take those steps. And I don't know why. And honestly, I don't know if it weren't for COVID kind of coming in and stopping things and having me stop, I don't know where I'd be today if I would have figured it out the same way. But at the same time, I feel like when you get those messages, it's really important that you try to listen to them and adjust, because if we're not at a good spot, and I think that's why there's so many issues today, especially with kids and mental health and all of the challenges, but it's not just the younger kids, it's a lot of older people too. I think a lot of it comes down to, just kind of summarize it, balancing too many plates, not having enough help in relationships to balance those plates, maybe not even knowing what the plates are because you don't really have a vision, and then judging other people's plates and being like, I don't have them, I wish I had that, or they're balancing 10 and I can't even balance 2, and that reflecting negatively on ourselves. And I think all of that together creates a lot of insecurity in people.
Amen to that. And we've all been there, and it is a process, but I love the way you said that.
Yeah. Thank you. So, well, thank you for opening up about that. I appreciate it and enjoyed that. I want to get into some of the clinical side, because you are a phenomenal clinician. I am not just saying that. Anybody who's seen your work, honestly, from seeing your work to know that you're I say only 7 years out, but in the ortho arena, 7, you only finish cases, say, even if it's a year case. There's only so many cases you're going to finish in 7 years. You've really got a knack for it. So, obviously, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'd imagine it's important to you and you're passionate about having an outstanding clinical outcome. And how do you go about trying to achieve that? And we don't have to get too grand or specific, but just kind of from a macro view, what are some of your philosophies? What are some of your beliefs and practices that have really helped you to become such an outstanding clinician so quickly? Do you have questions about a clinical case, or maybe a challenging practice management issue? Maybe you're a new doc who's starting a practice and doesn't know where to turn for advice. Doc's private one-on-one coaching platform is here to help you succeed in all these areas and more. Just go to theorthocoach.com and select coaching from the menu to enroll. And now back to today's podcast.
Oh yeah, I appreciate that. And so far from being perfect, and I look at my cases and I always find the flaws, like all of us, but it is something, it's part of my why. And what brings me joy in ortho is seeing the transformations and doing as much as I can from a clinical perspective. And I think it requires a lot of work to get there. It doesn't just happen. And I think it's important for people to realize that it doesn't necessarily just come with experience. It certainly will help the more experience that you have, because you've seen things before, which you can then duplicate or do better the next time. But it does require work. And so kind of early on, what I would hope to do and what I continue to do now is just, again, it's evaluating things really, really closely. That starts from records, being really intentional about taking really, really good records and looking at cases from a holistic perspective. We're talking etiology. We're talking like, what can I do if this is my canvas and I'm an artist? Like, what can I create? What do I want to create for this person? Listening to what they want. And really being good about the treatment planning portion. I'm all about simplifying mechanics. I don't really like crazy, difficult mechanics, because I want something that's going to be reproducible. And I feel like the more that we make things complicated, and I see a lot of orthodontists make things really, really complicated, but the more we simplify the mechanics, the more we can reproduce them. So, having a really good mind for the records, getting a really good treatment plan, simplifying mechanics, and doing things the same over and over and over. It's like, you look at, for example, let's take Kobe Bryant as an example. A lot of these famous basketball players, ones that are really good at their craft, is they do things the same way over and over and over. Hard as like when they are going to make a free throw, right? They dribble the ball, they spin it, they have their little thing they do, and do that over and over and over. And the more they do it, the better they're going to get, but it's with intention. They're not just doing it, they're doing everything has intention. And so also making the clinical decisions with intention and spending just time. And a lot of that, even for the records, is like, come in front of the patient, look at their smile, look
at their face, look at their face. Like,
and defining early on what you feel like are the characteristics of a great smile is so important. If you don't know where you're going and you don't have the vision for what it is, and have the eye for what it is, you're going to miss it all, So there are things I look at, with like the width of the arches, upper incisor display, gingival display, proportions and tooth size and shape, and gingival architecture. And then of course, profiles. It's like, we have these things that, for me, what constitutes a really great looking smile. And so I know what I'm looking for and what I'm looking to change. And I'm being really intentional about that, and taking lots of pictures, even during treatment, to reevaluate those things. But some of it comes down to also like, I think we all have this conundrum clinically where it's like, am I doing this for me, or am I doing it for the patient? And sometimes we do it for us because we're like, oh, we know we can make this case so amazing. And we push them to go an extra 3 or 4 or 6 months for us because we want the perfect finish, as opposed to they would have been happy to finish 6 months ago. And I'm not saying one is right and one is wrong. But I do think that, understanding why it is you're doing it, and really, again, coming down to what your why is going to be the most important thing. But from a clinical perspective, it's identifying, what it is that you think are the characteristics of a great looking smile, and not stopping at anything to try and achieve those, but still being as efficient as you can. And that really comes with the work of really spending time to evaluate your cases. Furthermore, from there, it's really spending time with a lot of good CE, identifying.
Can I interrupt for a second on that before you go to the CE? Because I want to reemphasize how just important what you said really is. And the residents, if they're listening to this, are probably like, because I didn't script Dr. Nichols to say this. I literally say the same thing about, I constantly, when I'm teaching, I'm talking about diagnosis, etiology. I feel like our profession has done a big disservice to itself in, old school profession was really kind of models on a table, right? So it is what it is. It was the past. It was kind of how things were judged. I'm not faulting it. We had a chance when we kind of evolved into, as we still are evolving, into the 3D arena and facial analysis and understanding things a lot more, airway and growth and development and transverse deficiencies and all of the things that we are aware of, a little more cognizant of now, or at least should be, to take the time. Because I truly believe the reason I was able to be as successful as I was in my case outcomes and efficiency was all in that planning process in that first time when I saw them in the room. And you don't need to do a 3-step process like you do in residency and sit down and trace every set. I'm not saying what everyone has to do, but I found I didn't need to do that. But you need a set group of parameters and an outline of exactly what you want to look at to keep yourself efficient. You need to know what's important. Like you said, that vision, those things you want to make sure you look at. You're looking at incisor display. You're looking at arch width. You have those parameters, which will be similar for a lot of us, but there will be some nuances that are definitely different depending on how we practice and what we believe and what systems we use. But taking the time to do that, and people, when I'll talk about that, I'll be like, oh, so you're against like a same day start. Like I didn't say that. I'm not at all against the same day start. I'm against a same day start if you bypass that process. I'm against a see in 3 weeks start if you bypass that process. I don't care when you put the braces on or take the scan for the Invisalign or whatever you're going to do. What I care about is that you don't rush through the diagnostics, because I feel like when cases get out of control, not always, but the vast majority of the time, when you're 2 years in and this case isn't finishing right, and things aren't going right, the vast majority of the time, it's because you misdiagnosed it or didn't detect what the actual etiology was, and you're now trying to fit things together to compensate for that. Would you agree with that?
100,000%. I mean, you really hit the nail on the head there. And it does take time to understand that. But again, we're talking about vision. It's like, what is your vision for the case? And then identifying again the systems in which you need to mark as what needs to be changed right before the brace of the scan, and then going after it. And again, looking at your cases, taking really good records, evaluating cases. The thing I feel like is really important is, A is just, you got to care about it first. You got to care about the clinical portion. If you want to be
great point. Glad you said that. Yeah.
At it, because some people just want to get through the case, and like you mentioned, they're just looking at the models on the table, which I absolutely hate that now. Because there's so much more we can do for people than get a good. And that's the bare minimum. Like for orthodontists, there's so much more we can do now. We also forget that we're craniofacial orthopedics. I feel like that's been lost a lot too. It's like there's so much more we can do for people's faces.
Why do you think that is? Why? Because I agree with you completely. Why have we almost gone more toward the tooth side and less to the overall structures that are surrounding and supporting the teeth side, including airway and growth and development? And I mean, even down into the neurocognitive impacts that a lot of breathing issues can have on young kids. Why are we fighting that paradigm shift in our profession?
I feel like it's there's a couple of things. One is I feel like it's a little bit of laziness, to be honest, on the clinician side, because we are so worried about getting the start, or worried about, we don't want to overcomplicate things for the patient. And so we're just going to talk about X, Y, or Z. And I also think that in some ways, the technology of orthodontics has done us a disservice, because you think of aligners, for example, most of the people, when they're setting up their case, they're just looking at the ClinCheck or the approver, whatever software you're using. They're not even looking at the patient's face. They're just literally looking at the models.
Right. Good point. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I always used to have a split screen on at that point, and now I have one large monitor in my home office, but I had two big monitors, and I would literally have the pictures on one, and always, whether it was a refinement, I always had the clinical photos and those models up, because I just found that I would get lost in the plaster, so to speak, the digital plaster, if I didn't do that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that's the only way I'll do a case is I got to see the pictures first, have the pictures up with the ClinCheck or the approver, whatever it is that we're using. So I think in some ways technology's done us a little bit of a disservice. And I think people also we're impatient as a population. The more that we've grown impatient, instant gratification, I think that, some of that goes by the wayside. But what I have found is the more we come back to the faces and the orthopedics and the etiology, people really actually do appreciate that. They really do.
Yeah.
And taking the time to educate them, and not that you have to have a 45-minute consultation by any means, but along the way, you're explaining to them what you're doing and why you're doing it. People really do appreciate that.
Yeah.
I think some of it is just slow down for a little bit. Forget seeing 120 patients a day.
Yeah.
Just slow down and communicate with people, educate people. And you don't have to do it the same way that other people are doing it. Again, there's so much we can do for people. And that was going to kind of lead me to my next spot is you gotta find either a great mentor or some great CE that you align with. We're talking about so again, you have your vision for what you want your career to look like, your vision for what you want your cases to look like. Well, find someone that aligns with that vision that could be a mentor for you, or find the CE that relates to that vision, and always be on top of what's the latest and greatest in technology, but know what people are doing out there. If you're just in your little box, and again, it's not a comparison thing. I'm not talking about comparing yourself to those people, but being inspired by some of them is a great thing. And there's a difference between being inspired by someone or motivated versus comparison. But seeing what other people are doing and attending and learning as much as you can through CE, I think is so important too, because I have so many orthodontic friends that, again, are so invested in, they want to be open. They don't want to take time away from the practice, you know? And so I feel like they miss out on some of the advances they could be taking that could even enable them, if their goal is to make more money, or to be better or more efficient clinically. As there is so much new stuff that comes out all the time. And there's some brilliant minds in orthodontics.
Yeah, really are. Yeah.
And that's one of my favorite things about why I like doing the traveling and stuff and the lecturing, is because I learn more than anybody else. And I get to take those little pearls and I get to bring them back to make, my experiences with my patients better clinically, relationship wise, all of that. And so some of that is more selfish for me, because I get a lot more than I feel like I give.
Interesting. Yeah. And then how do you correct along the way? Because no matter how well we diagnose, and that's what some people will say, is there's still, it's never going to be perfect. Of course, there's always challenges. But number one, you have to know where you're going, and along the way, analogous to like driving, right? You've got to know your destination. And then you may have a smooth trip and it may go great, but there's those times where there's an accident or there is a block, construction in the road or whatever. And you get waylaid into other areas and you have to divert and adjust. What's helped you be the most successful in figuring out when to adjust and how to adjust?
Such a good question. And we all misdiagnose cases. We hope that, right. And as we get more experience, we get better understanding our own limitations or the limitations of the systems that we're using. But once we get into a case, and I typically find that let's say it's a bracket and wire case, and I've gone through my initial wires, and I kind of getting into like what we would do for panel repo. It's a big thing, or scano repo if you're using a CBCT. That for me is a great reset point, because we're 4 to 6 months into treatment. It's a great reset point. From that point forward, I will try and take the records at the beginning of the appointment instead of the end of the appointment.
Okay.
And my favorite picture is the facial smiling photo. And I want to look at that. Like the first thing I want to look at when I come to the chair, especially if they're in finishing wires, is I want to see that facial smiling photo of the patient, authentic smile. And I'm going to use that for that appointment. And from there, don't take any shortcuts. If you feel like something needs to be repositioned or you need to make a change in the treatment plan, don't wait to do it. Do it right away. Do it right away. Don't delay what you need to do. When every appointment a patient comes in, do as much as you can. Every appointment. But having those records for me up before, instead of just taking records after, it helps me evaluate the case better right then and there and make the biggest impact on the case that visit. And it helps me not waste time. And then if you realize you made an error or something happened, there's an accident in treatment, things aren't working as you thought they would, the time to reevaluate and make that decision early rather than later. And if you need to change gears, that's fine. Change gears. Yep. We all have to change gears on cases all the time, but it's doing it sooner rather than later. Don't make excuses. Just talk to the patient about it. If you're going in that way and you just want what's best for them, even if it's going to require them 6 months more of treatment, just tell them what your goals are and let them help you make that decision. If they're not willing to go down that road, then okay, at least you've done everything you can, and that's their decision. But if you're not you talk about reevaluating, right? We're reevaluating our lives and our goals. We're doing the same thing for our cases. We're reevaluating, revisit, but we have to take the time to do it, and we have to have the ability to do that. And the only way we can do that is having good records and looking at the case instead of just going in and checking, making a quick bend and walking away.
Yep.
We have to be intentional about it all the time.
Have you heard about the Doc community on Facebook? It's where you can get access to more great content, including case reviews, select clips from CE courses and podcasts, literature reviews, and exclusive promotions and discounts off Doc educational materials. Just go to Facebook and search for the Doc community and submit a request to join the group. And now back to the podcast. And it's so funny because I find that when it's a clear aligner case, we inherently do that because we'll see something not going right with the aligners. And even if it's so we got 40 aligners and we're on 25, we'll be like, oh, rescan, this isn't going right. But with fixed, it's for some reason, we're so hesitant to do that and make those mid-course corrections, which is, I think, why a lot of people say, oh, I can treat an aligner case more quickly and more efficiently. Well, sometimes I think it's because you saw it was going wrong and you were like, I'm not going to take you down another 15, 20 aligners where we're just going to reboot. But in fixed, you're like, well, let's see, maybe it'll work out in another 4 or 5 months, and then 4 or 5 months down the road you realize it probably hasn't worked out.
Such a good point. And it's ever evolving, for sure, but that's what makes it fun for me. You know, when they polled a lot of orthodontic residents and found out why it is that most of us go into ortho, and actually the reason is critical thinking. We enjoy
interesting
orthodontics. So I think that's what brings the fun for me, is that every case is a different challenge. There's no two cases that are the same, but I want them to end up looking very similar. Yeah. So it's how we do that. It's a fun puzzle piece game, but it's not a one size fits all. And it's not necessarily making things more complicated, but it's doing things with intention, and being, again, specific and looking at what our goals are going to be rather than just running through the wires.
Right. And then at the end, all of a sudden you're 18, 20 months in, you've run through your wires, and then it's like, now, now they're a little class 2, and they're too deep, or they don't have the right incisor display. But now the patient's starting to get to the point where I told them 20 to 22 months. And I think we find ourselves in that position so often. And then it's like, well, let's just, get them class 1 and it's okay. And we'll get them the best we can, as opposed to, no, if we looked at it 6 months in, or say a year prior to where we were, we could have made the changes that were needed then, instead of just mechanically going through the process. And it's so funny because a lot of people will be like, oh, I don't even have a wire sequence because it changes so much. And that's horribly, and you can practice how you want. I'm not saying that person can't do that, but I found that's horribly inefficient to not have some sort of system and process by which you operate. I mean, it just, if you want to do that, fine, but I don't think you're going to have the most efficient, predictable outcomes either. But the flip side of that is you also don't want to just ignore it, go through that sequence, and then try to figure out at the end of the sequence, now what?
Yep, I agree. And I think most people, for us, as orthodontists, we would say the finishing is always the toughest. And so that's when you need to spend the most time.
Yeah.
Do your appointments longer, whatever it takes.
Right.
But the finishing it's all in the details. And I think that's the difference between a case that's like a B+ and an A+. It's those extra finishing steps. But if you aren't efficient early, then you may not have time for those steps because patients get burnt out, or here you are, you're 24 months into an 18-month treatment plan, and then you feel like your then goal changes from having a great finish to finishing the patient
to a finish. Yeah,
that becomes the goal. Is like, forget, we're past the perfect finish at this point. And I know there's no such thing, right? But we're past the great finish. Now we're onto the stage of just finishing. And that's not a place that you want to be with any case.
No. And I think a lot of people spend more time there than either they care to or admit, and that can be something that really frustrates people. But it goes back to what you said, is it has to start with the plan and the vision and the treatment plan and the etiology. And I found that once I did that, more effectively, I always took a lot of time in that diagnostic and treatment planning process. But once I got really, really much better at that, to where I could see it ahead, I found that really put me on a great course. And then I love what you said too about being willing to correct along the way. One thing I know we both have in common from just seeing your work, I actually had a kind of I guess put it out as a podcast, but it was on enamel recontouring. I call it, some people call it finishing, detail, Hollywooding, all sorts of different terms for it. But I know from looking at your cases and seeing your work, we share a passion for that. So tell me a little bit about how you approach that, and how you feel it sets your cases apart.
I appreciate that. It is one of my absolute favorite things.
Me too. Like obsessively so.
What can I do with the shape of these teeth to make them like natural veneers by the end? And there's totally a process to it. And for me, it's probably one of the most fun things. My two things, when we look at arch width and profile and incisor display, and then the hard and soft tissue contour, those are two of my favorite things because I feel like they get missed so often. So much in orthodontics takes us so long. And these are things we can do that in an appointment or two can make a huge difference on a patient's smile. So when it comes to enamel contouring, I have a very specific protocol. And for me, again, it starts at the beginning, and it's identifying, okay, these are the teeth that we've been given. What are some limitations that I have? What's the good and the bad? Am I going to need to involve restorative dentistry to get this to be ideal? And also, I want to push the limits a little bit of what I can do naturally.
Yes.
A lot that if you don't go after it, you're never going to get it. And so there's so much that we can do. I mean, looking at some of the cases, it's like, I would have never thought the teeth could look like that, but I have to try it. So identifying, number one, is what are the ideals? I just put an article out to Ortho Town that's called like the finishing touches. And it talks about shapes and proportions, the gold ratios, things like that. And so identifying where
I'll put a link to that too in the show.
So identifying what changes are going to need to be made are really important. Now, some patients are open to pre-treatment enameloplasty and some aren't. I find that if it's a patient that, you've treated family members or friend or whatever, they're more open to it. But a lot of patients, when they're new to your practice and you're just, starting their aligners or you're putting their braces on, they don't necessarily feel super comfortable with you going and grinding on their teeth, even though that may be the ideal for us, right? So what I find is I do a lot of it along the way. The biggest appointment for me when it comes to reshaping is after the first refinement in aligners and at panel repo. I will spend a lot of time doing my enameloplasty at those two appointments. One of the biggest reasons for that is I used to wait until the end to do a lot of it. And what I would find is that if, especially there are certain incisal edge contours to be done, I waited till the very end. And I worked super hard to especially with aligners, build in extrusion for smile arc. And then I contoured my incisal edges and now the smile's flat.
Yeah. Flatten it.
Myself. I'm like, gosh, dang, I spent all this time building in smile arc and then I just flattened the smile at the end because I did my contouring. But what I found is if I do it at the panel repo or the refinement scan, and I do most of the incisal edge contouring, then I reposition my brackets for smile arc, or I can then build in some more extrusion in the aligner protocol to get the teeth with the, smile arc and incisal display that I want at the end without having to guess how much I'm going to do. And I think most of us are pretty good at the incisal edge portion, at least getting flat incisal edges. I feel like where most orthodontists struggle is contacts and embrasures.
The embrasures. Without a doubt.
And facial surfaces. So, with the embrasures, it's finding your technique and practicing the heck out of it, practice. And what I would often do is I would take a picture after I contoured, and sure enough, I would find something. And I couldn't see it in the mouth. And I put it on a screen and I'd be like, dang, I missed that spot. So again, it was being intentional. I would literally take the picture. I would take the time to put it on the screen, blow it up, and say, you know what? The upper right two is a little longer than the upper left two, and the embrasure here doesn't match. And I can adjust it. And some of the cases I made at the beginning, for sure, I would take 3 pictures till I got it right, and there were some I would literally call the patient back and say, hey, there's a spot I missed. And all of them were like, oh my gosh, you're so detailed. You want to bring me back into, I didn't even notice it, but I'm like, I want to perfect it. So you have to really, if you want to perfect it, you got to spend the time and energy to know what you want it to look like and then to get after it. And then the other part, I feel like that, with the connectors is, they don't spend, I think we understand that we can contour incisal edges really well and even get embrasures, but we don't think about contouring interproximally very often. And there's so many patients that need that. Just for proportion. If you have patients that have smaller laterals and huge centrals, you have to make a decision, right? Are you going to add to the laterals? Are you going to subtract from the centrals? And I'm not saying every case is different, right? But knowing what you can do there and spending the time during treatment to recontour interproximally. And then finally, I feel like another huge area that we miss is facial surfaces. The reflection of the light in the smile is all that facial surface. And I completely agree with you. And it's not that hard to do. I typically will take a chamfer fine diamond burr, and it's very slow, but I'm going tooth to tooth to make sure that there's no bumps, weaves, and things like that. And then you polish it out, and it's like their smile just pops. It pops. It's amazing. It's you're so right. And you can take a case, and I do this every day, that I'm like, the finish is good, but I don't love everything. And if you get really good at reshaping teeth, you can take a case that's to holy crap, that case looks amazing, just by getting really good at reshaping teeth. And I think that is a skill that a lot of us as orthodontists, we feel like, oh, we don't need hand skills because we're putting brackets on. I beg to differ all the way. I use loops, and I think the hand skill is the most important thing that I'm going to use, because bracket placement is the number one most important clinical thing that we're going to do in a brackets case, and shaping for me, those two things, getting the brackets in the right spot, and having a good reshaping ability, I think just will make the cases just treat so much nicer. Completely agree. I absolutely agree with everything you just said. And the only thing I'll add is patients notice the difference in your results and finishes than somebody else's, even kids, because I would literally have kids, I had a bunch of
younger girls I treated that would end up working for me in high school and doing lab work, making, I was at 3D print lab. So they do that stuff and make retainers and sterilization, turn chairs. But they would say, yeah, so I saw so-and-so and I know they didn't, I know they didn't come here because I could tell by the smile, or, people, these are kids. They know that, they notice it. They notice the difference. And adults would sometimes come saying, I saw my friend's teeth, and just the way this, that, and I would send before and after pictures to them all after post part of our protocol and system. After the debon, they got a letter and it had a before and after picture with a smile and the open bite and all these little pearls. But please, everybody, take an open bite picture. I find it is just, yeah, you see it nodding there. Wait, so you got cut off. Go say that again.
I was just saying, amen. That's my second favorite picture. So,
yep. Yeah. So I'd have my smile and open bite picture before and after. It's so important in the initial because it helps you show people where there's breakdown, attrition, caving into the lower arch, insufficient tongue space, scalloping of the lateral borders of the tongue, all these other parts of it. But it's also so important in your finishing because it really lets you look at the smile arc you created, the really analyze. It's hard. So what you were saying before about seeing the embrasure spaces and blowing it up. I didn't, in my head, I think a lot of people were probably thinking, well, how would you even see that when they're biting down? Because it's hard to see. In my head, you had a patient with an open bite picture. I don't know if that's true or not, but
that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly. There's no other way to see that.
Yeah. Like literally, but as you were describing it, in my head, I was picturing that. And then I had this thought, I'm like, a lot of people are probably thinking, how can you even see that? But because you've got to take that open bite picture. But we would send that to the patients and people would say, like, I saw it on my friend's fridge, or we'd email it to them as well. And they'd say, they emailed it to me or send me it on their phone. And they notice those are little details that people notice. It's not just our OCD that may be the origin, but ultimately these people know it.
I think you're so right. And what greater compliment could you get, than people understanding that your work is different and that it's intentional and that it's detail oriented. And, some of my favorite compliments is if a patient ever says, and I'm sure you've gotten this a lot, is like, did you do veneers or did you have a deposit? And I get this is natural. Like, it's kind of like, no, I did it. We did it natural. I love it because it's maintenance free. I mean, they just have to wear their retainers and brush their dang teeth. They don't have to worry about replacing veneers or composite. And some cases need that. That's fine. But if we could make it a smaller percentage by getting really good at shaping teeth and having that be part of our job for every single case, not just referring the cases that need it, man, it makes it so much more fun. Like, that's the creativity. That's the artistry in what we do, is taking those details and making them. It's so fun. I love that.
No, I'm with you. It is something I absolutely love. Like, my team would they would be like, they would laugh at how passionate I got about reshaping these teeth. And every now and again, you get a patient or a parent who's like, I don't want it. I don't want any enamel reduced. And it literally pained me to have to take the pieces off. I would put a note in the letter to the GP or pediatric dentist saying, Mrs. So-and-so requested that we don't, because I was like, I can't, like, it would literally pain me. I would tell them, like, are you sure? I mean, and not only because of the aesthetics, but when you smooth that enamel, I use the analogy all the time for people in warm weather. It won't make as much sense, but anybody who's in the colder weather, when you're chopping ice on the edge of a driveway, if it's beveled and smooth, it's really hard. Ice is a crystalline structure, just like the enamel of our teeth. It's really hard to get that little shovel or edge underneath the ice. It's smooth. When it's jagged and irregular, you can kind of fragment it and chop away at it. Enamel's crystalline, ice is crystalline. So in the Northeast where I practice, there was ice a lot of the year. So people got that. And I would say, there's functional reasons too for this. And some were just like, nope, absolutely not. And again, I always respected that. They're in control of that, but it pained me to have to see that. And the team would laugh at me. They're like, oh, you're after the debon, they're like, you're dying. I'm like, I know, I can't take it.
That is probably one of my top, like, 2 or 3 things that is the biggest, toughest battle for me, right? Is that exact thing. Because to walk away from that, knowing you couldn't do it, knowing you can and how good it would, it's so hard. So hard.
On that note, kind of to wrap up, and it's kind of an appropriate segue, is the challenges, right? We've talked a lot about through this, the challenges we face and how we mitigate those and navigate those and persevere through those difficult times. One of the things I know I didn't do great at was enjoying the ride enough. And in this, I'd like you to kind of talk about your passion for health and fitness as well, because I know that helped me so much mentally and physically, and still does. I'm just so passionate about it, and it's just a part of who I am, but I feel it makes me a better person, and mentally and obviously for my longevity and physical well-being too. On the top of that, I don't think I ever really appreciated just what I created with my practice. And I'm really trying to do better with my sort of teaching endeavors and have a little more enjoyment of the ride. But I became so goal focused and so focused on the results and expectations that we talked a lot about before, right? That perfectionism and expecting ourselves. It was like, if I did great, it wasn't like, oh, great job, Mike. It was, that's what you should do. That's who you are. And that's what you should achieve. And I don't think in that I enjoyed the ride enough in my practice life that I should have. How do you, I'm imagining that's a similar struggle for you, just being wired so similarly. And how do you deal with that? And what are you doing to try to make sure you do enjoy the ride?
Man, such a good point and such a good question. And I want to first answer your question with a question. How do you feel like that is now compared to how it was then? Like you're now, do you feel like you can enjoy the ride where you are today better than you could when you were in practice the way that you were then?
110%. Yeah. Without a doubt, I feel I can enjoy it more now. And I have a much better perspective and I'm much better at setting boundaries and limits, not taking every speaking engagement that comes my way, not just continuing to have, but being staging and balancing those plates, doing a better job balancing the plates. And I feel in that, I do feel I'm able to enjoy that more.
Yeah. And that's my thought exactly is, I think, again, number one is that is a struggle for me. It's always been a struggle for me. My wife and I talk about it often because again, for me, it's like, what's the next thing? We get to the top of the mountain. We don't like look down to see, look how far I've climbed. We see the next mountain up there and are like, all right, well, that's my next goal. And we never take the time to appreciate how far we've come. And other people will appreciate it. They'll tell us all the time, right? Like,
right. Yeah.
And you're like, yeah, but I want to do this, like this is nothing. I want to get to this next level. And it is a constant struggle. And that's why the gratitude, journal or the daily routines of having a morning routine, getting into the gym, kind of grounding myself mentally, having some time to reflect, like you mentioned, and really focus on gratitude helps me to realize where I've come. But the reason I asked you that question, as you live your life now and your work life now versus your work life then, and you feel like you're living your purpose and your why, I think it becomes easier. I really do. I don't know exactly why that is.
Interesting.
What I found is, again, I'm more authentic to myself and what I know that I want to do to make myself happy, the more I'm able to enjoy the ride, because I think I always felt before when I wasn't being as authentic to what I knew was in my heart, I was hoping that I would get that with the next thing that I achieved.
Interesting.
Like,
okay.
When I do this, then I'll get that fulfillment and happiness. Oh, when I do this, I'll get my fulfillment and happiness. But when you're living in the fulfillment, get the happiness along the way. And I think that that's something we don't think about often as well. And it's funny, kind of full circle. We've talked about, in life in general, finding our why and our purpose and those core values is being so fundamental to making us be successful in our own way. And success for me just means happiness, And then we talked about it in the same way with ortho. It all comes down to our purpose and our vision and our why, and understanding what it is that's going to make us happy and successful with what that means for us. And then the same with our cases. What do we want our cases to look like? How is that going to affect what we do clinically? But it all starts with that vision. If we have the vision for our life and our vision for what our clinical goals are, I think we're able to enjoy the process a lot more.
I'm going to leave it with that. That is, so well said. And I think that's just a great place to finish. And like you said, come full circle on it. It's so well stated. And there's been so many pearls you've offered in this. Honestly, I can't thank you enough for being on, for being so open, for sharing not just the good, but the challenges and the things that others are going through, because I know this helps people. And that's my goal with this is to be able to get the message out to our colleagues and even people who may not be in our profession that listen to the show, just that there's challenges there. And so many of those themes that we talked about today, I think really go a long way. And just can't thank you enough. Dr. Trevor Nichols, I really appreciate it, brother. Thanks for taking the time and thanks for all you do. And I wish you the best in your new practice endeavor and everything going on there. You're going to kill it. There's no doubt about it. There's just none. It's just a matter of when, and I'm excited for you, and stay in touch. And I'm sure we'll be crossing paths as we go through this and continue to be on this journey.
Well, Mike, I appreciate that. Thank you for the opportunity. And I just also want to give you some acknowledgement, for living your purpose and helping change lives. And you are adding a ton of value to me, to this industry in whole. And I just think it's an amazing thing, again, coming down to your purpose and your service. And I also want to just, I would love to be there for people in any way that I can too. So if there's anyone listening that, wants to have a conversation, again, part of that is I know that I just value relationships and learn a lot. We can learn a lot through these discussions. I've enjoyed getting to know you. And if there's anybody that wants to have another ortho friend, I'd love to be that guy.
How can people get in touch with you if they want to reach? What's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Probably best way would just be Instagram. My Instagram handle is just Trevor Nichols, and they can shoot me a message. I'm really good about responding, and I formed a lot of wonderful relationships through Instagram, and I love it. It's a great part of my life.
Awesome. That's great. Well, thank you so much. Can't express enough how great it was chatting with you and having you on. Appreciate it.
You're the man. Thanks again.
You too. Thanks. Take care, Trev.
You too.
Thank you for watching this episode of the Doc Podcast. Be sure to visit theorthocoach.com to get access to ADA CERP recognized CE courses or to schedule a private one-on-one coaching session with me. And remember to join the Doc community on Facebook for more great content designed to help you succeed both personally and professionally. Just go to Facebook, search for the Doc community, and request admission into the group. You can also find Doc on Instagram at @theorthocoach. And always remember, you have been blessed with the ability to do amazing things.